thanks, Tristram. So you would have just heard Tristram speak, and for those of you who've just popped in, Tristram is the Activate Club's manager, and he'll also be helping me run an MC tonight. But I'm also Kate. I'm the current president of the UTS Consulting Club. I'll be helping facilitate the questions and walk us through some of the key insights that we're going to all be gaining from the panel tonight. So just a bit of an overview of what this night will look like. We're currently at the general introduction stage, but we will be over shortly and we'll dive right in. And then we will move into some pre-submitted questions. So thank you to everyone who upon application has submitted some questions. We've also got some additional ones to that to give you a bit of an overview of what is consulting and what is management and strategy consulting. And then we'll then transition into some audience questions that you can submit on the night. So I'll explain about how to do that now. So we are using a software called Slido. It's very straightforward. You can either scan the QR code or join at slido.com and use the code there. And we'll have the QR code on every single slide in case you lose it or you click away. So don't panic there. I really do encourage if you hear something, an answer that a panelist says that really interests you, something controversial, something that comes up, or a question that you might have submitted that we didn't get to, feel free to add that at any time into the Slido. And I also encourage you to have it open as the night progresses, because you're able to upvote questions that you really think are worth answering and prioritizing those questions that I as the facilitator can see those and know that that's really a juicy one. So moving on to our panelists for tonight, and I'd really like to extend my warm thank you to every single panelist for taking some time out of their Monday evening to spend some time and share some knowledge with us this evening. So to kick us off, we have Justin. Justin is from Oliver Wyman, and which is one of our sponsors for this year. And Justin, this isn't his first rodeo with the UTS Consulting Club. He's also featured in a few other events as well. So thank you, Justin, for your time. Well, I'm sure we'll learn a bit more about you as we proceed through the questions. We then have Josh. Josh is an associate at Kearney. Hi, Josh. This is also not his first panel event. This event used to be called LOAC, and so he's definitely knows the kinds of questions we will ask him, but I'm sure there'll be some new ones thrown in there. We also have Tien. Tien was a previous vice president at UTS Consulting Club, so an alumni has come back and is generously spending her Monday night with us there. Tien's an associate at Strategy and finally, we've got Carolyn, who's a recent graduate as well, like Tien, and she's a consultant at KPMG and is also a previous UTS Consulting Club member. So we really appreciate her coming back and spending some time with us. So that's the panel. I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about their stories and personalities in just a moment. So with that introduction, I'll now dive straight into the questions. With the questions, just so that we can make sure that everyone gets a fair chance at answering and it's not the same person going first every time, what we'll do is we'll go from left to right, and the person who answered first last time will just simply go at the end. So it'll be Justin, Josh, Tien, and Carolyn, and then next time we'll start with Josh and end with Justin. I know it can get a bit confusing. There's probably every panel has a different way of doing the questions, but I'll try and keep on top of it, but forgive me if I get a little confused. So without further ado, we'll dive into the very first question, which is what led you to consulting and how did you begin your career as a management consultant? So Justin, we'll kick off with you, please.
Sounds good. Hey everyone, really good to be here. Firstly, sorry for any background noise. I'm cooking dull in the background as you do on a Monday night. So what led me to consulting So I guess for me, I didn't really know what consulting was until pretty late. I started my uni degree in comm law, UNSW. And at first, I wasn't quite sure if I wanted to be a banker or, go down the legal path. And I ended up finding a job, just like a first year uni job at a startup. And that kind of grew and grew. So I ended up spending like close to 4 years in the kind of startup world. And while I was there, I really loved it. You get, for anyone who's kind of worked at an early stage startup, it's really cool. You get to do a bit of, business development work, bit of marketing, strategy, and even some like technical work too. And I started to realize, pretty quickly that my interests are maybe a little bit broader than, just banking or just law. I wasn't quite sure where that would lead me. And a good mate of mine who was actually going into consulting was like, hey, I think, you'd really like this because, that whole problem solving element, you're constantly on different projects. For anyone who, is really antsy and likes to try lots of different things all the time, consulting is a good place to be. So I ended up applying for some internships in my penultimate year and landed up at Oliver Wyman and had a really good experience there. So joined as a graduate like almost 2 years ago now. And yeah, it kind of haven't looked back since. It's been a really good time. So that's sort of my background and my journey so far.
Thanks, Justin. I'll now pass on to Josh.
Yeah, so I'm not a typical management consultant in the sense that I didn't graduate out of uni, didn't look for internships, and then didn't join a consulting firm straight out of uni. I did strategy in an internal management consulting sense at CommBank. So there was an internal strategy team and we would do strategic and operational projects across the bank. So within finance, within tech, within retail banking, business banking. I found that was really good. So I spent 3 years there, really cut my teeth, learned some of the tools of the trade. And then I realized I wanted to try something outside of banking. And if you're a management consultant in a bank, pretty much all you're going to be doing is banking. And so I met an alumni of the firm who had worked at CBA as well. And he was like, look, why don't you apply to Carney? Met some of the partners at Carney, talked to them about their sort of financial services angle and whether or not I'd just be doing financial services. And they're like, no, absolutely not. And joined the firm. And since then, it's been a real big learning curve, but also a really great, you're working with great, sharp people. So that was really, I think, the impetus was wanting to get out of banking. And then it's just been such a great journey. It's a great roller coaster.
Great, thanks, Josh. And I think it's a great point to note that Josh didn't, dive straight in as a graduate. So if you do have any questions about perhaps an alternate route into consulting, please do ask that on the slide. I'm sure Josh will be more than happy to think about, did he weigh up, was it worth leaving the security of a safe corporate job into the craziness of consulting? If you have that question, do ask on Slido. But I'll now move on to Tien.
Hey everyone, so for context, yes, I recently graduated from UTS, actually studying a Bachelor of Business and a Bachelor of Science. And for me, throughout uni, I had really wanted to find a way that I could connect the skills I had learnt from those 2 degrees. So with the science degree, you do get a lot of, problem-based solving, hypothesis-based solving. With business, you get a lot of the business acumen, learning how to work, understanding how businesses work in corporations. And I was the vice president of what used to be called Business One, now the UTS Consulting Club. So in terms of what brought me to consulting and how I kind of found out about it, I think for most of you on this call, events like this is a perfect way to get started. You do really get the chance to, hear a bunch of people from different firms, different careers, talk about their experiences. And eventually one of the firms that sponsored us, being Strategy that I had heard about at the time, I had just been drawn to the type of work they were doing. So yeah, I think it's the chance to combine that hypothesis-led problem solving, but also be able to work with a business and a business lens in that context.
Great, thanks, Tien. And finally, Carolyn.
Hi everyone. For me, my consulting journey, similar to Justin, I came into university not quite knowing what I wanted to do. I didn't know what Big Four was, and all of my friends did. And I guess I was quite confused in the whole career after university space. And I guess after exploring a couple of things, a couple of industries, startups, fintech, and all of that, and also trying a couple of different things, I found that where my passion lied was in problem solving and trying a lot of new different things and constantly having to react and be proactive to new emerging problems. And from there, I found out about consulting, which I think the industry really enables that kind of dynamic and really interesting problems that you get to solve on the day-to-day. And from there, I joined UTSCC, or Business One as it used to be called at UTS. And also I tried my hand in a couple of other industries as well, such as startups, superannuation, and credit insurance as well. So I think that was quite an interesting couple of paths that led me to consulting.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. I'll now move on to the next question. So our next question is around a highlight of a recent project, or if you don't have a specific highlight, but maybe a highlight of your career so far, it'd be really great to share with us something that's really stood out to you and what you've learned and gained from that experience. So we'll start with Josh.
Yeah, I was thinking about this just briefly, and I think as strategists, sometimes you get to work on strategy projects and you might deliver an answer. Sometimes you get to go a bit further and build an implementation plan. And like, I think one of the areas that's emerging in terms of strategy development is really design thinking. How do you incorporate the customer? How do you incorporate customer needs analysis into the strategy development process? And so one of the projects that I worked on recently was an end-to-end sort of strategy to design thinking to implementation. And where we for this client, we helped them define what segments are you going to go after. Then we took the design thinking approach and we said, look, what's a proposition that's going to appeal to these segments? How do you sort of, and doing ethnographic research, having some of our team, which Kate was a part of, like our PC, our proposition customer and experience team, come in and really like run the innovation process, you know, get people sketching in notebooks and get the business excited about creating new ideas. And then taking that and bringing that back into the strategy, the classic strategy of the classic strategy formulation of how do you size that? How do you build an implementation plan? And then how do you actually like drive that across the business? So I think that was like absolutely riveting to be able to see sort of strategy, design thinking and implementation come together. And like what I've gained is like an idea of how to run that process, but also a really fond appreciation for design and designers and sketchbooks that you carry with you all the time. So that's mine. On to you, Tien.
So similar with me, I think there's two approaches I can take with this. Being part of strategy, and we do, as our name says, try to focus on that strategy type work. And if you are familiar with, you know, any business case studies that you'll do for interviews, you'll find that there's a very set structure for some of these questions that they'll ask you. And sometimes when you start on a project, you'll find that those frameworks that you had learnt about, they do carry over into some of the jobs that you do. So you find that from theory into when you're actually in practice, you feel like you are quite familiar with some of the problems you're working with. And for example, at the moment, I'm on a growth project. So it's very much thinking about how can we help this business grow? What other industries can they extend to? But another interesting thing is that it's not always set and it doesn't always have to be strategy work. And that's the fun nature about being consulting, because at the end of the day, we are helping to try and deliver value to our clients. So if I had to think about what a highlight of a project I've been on, it's actually very different. So one of the projects that I had enjoyed the most so far is actually helping an ASX 20 client who was going through a run to elect a new CEO. And our task was to actually help support one of the CEO elects. So you think about, as a student, applying for a job interview, right? When a CEO is applying for a group CEO role, it's pretty much a very similar process where not so much a resume on a piece of paper, but they have to conduct a bunch of interviews and talk about what they've done within their time. If they're currently in that company at the moment, what pieces of work have they done? Where have they demonstrated leadership? What have their working styles been? And as consultants, it's really trying to help them craft that story, trying to help them piece together all that work that they've done so far, and demonstrate, you know, what can they bring to this company that can really show that they can be a great leader. So although very different in nature, still a strategy lens to it, because you are helping them, you know, take a problem and bring a structured approach to it. So I thought that was like a very interesting project.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Tien. I'll pass on to Carolyn.
For me, one of, I guess, the most interesting and highlights of the work I have worked on is ones that do deliver tangible impact that you can see quite immediately. And I think the most recent one was working with a client in terms of COVID-19 procurement. So first of all, it was definitely a very current environment, engagement, and it was also something where you could immediately see feedback and the impacts that precipitated. And so for there, it was just being able to see the strategy behind, you know, a lot of what you would see around in the news, a lot of what businesses and people were talking about, and really being able to see in the back end and what happens, I guess, backstage, and what kind of thinking and strategy goes behind all the decisions that you see on the front end, such as the news outlets. And I guess that's a highlight for me, being able to immediately see the impacts implemented as well, and seeing, I guess, some of your hard work go to the other individuals in the country, to all the Australians, and really impact a lot of people's lives as well. And I think what I gained from that as well, from an operational end, from there, definitely learned quite a lot about, first of all, data processing, and really developing that data hygiene, as well as the language behind that as well, to especially things where you have to be quite careful in what you're presenting and how that's depicted to everyone else as well, and tied in with the impact as well, the timeliness. I think that was definitely a really good learning experience and curve for me.
Awesome, thank you. I'll pass on to Justin.
I guess what everyone can probably tell already is like the diverse range of projects that you do in consulting, right? I think that is kind of like the key kind of thing that I've felt working at Oliver Wyman thus far. And with each project, there's like ups and downs, and you really kind of want to try find a highlight in each one, because they're going to change in terms of the type of work you do, in terms of the client, the industry. So that's kind of just an important thing to keep in mind. If there was, you know, one project in particular that kind of got me quite excited, was possibly the first one I did when I joined as a grad. I was lucky enough to, you know, fly like overseas, literally week 1 or week 2, to support a client in the aviation engineering space, which was like a totally different world to anything I'd ever experienced before. And yeah, so we started this project, and it was a very technical, like engineering kind of project, and the team was with people from all over, from Singapore, like Americas, Australia, Ireland. Like, it was a really diverse team with a really diverse skill set, and firstly to be put in a foreign country, in a foreign industry, I was like, wow, this is, you know, super unique. And what was quite cool was, as that project progressed, we sort of discovered that the client needed support in other areas of the business. So once that project came to a close, there was another project that began, and I was lucky enough to be on that project too, which was a completely different angle. We were helping them to kind of like redesign their organization and make sure that it's in line with best practice. So you know, same client, same industry, totally different project. I think in consulting, you kind of are bound to have these different experiences, whether it be a strategy, a growth angle, you know, whatever you call it, you get the diversity. And for me, that was a really cool highlight of that. And yeah, something that I enjoyed heaps. So.
Thanks, Justin. And I think definitely a key theme across all 4 answers was around the learning. I think that's something that really excites, I think, a lot of students. You might assume that, you know, come graduation, you get your piece of paper, the learning stops there. But I definitely get the vibe that from all 4 panelists, that you're constantly being challenged with completely different industries, like from aviation to superannuation to banking. And there's always learning about new processes as well. As Tian said, you've got the theory, but even Josh is learning new things around design thinking. So lots of learning involved and lots of tangible lessons and experiences there. So that's really great. Thanks panel. We'll now move on to the next question around what a typical day looks like for you. Now, I can understand perhaps there might be some similarity here amongst answers, but I also encourage panelists to perhaps reflect on maybe what's one or 2 things that have changed with COVID as well, and how you might think that will change the industry as a whole, perhaps. So to start off with, we'll start with Tien.
Yes, definitely agree with that, Kate, in terms of COVID and how it's impacted what a typical day would look like. I think, as we all know, we are using, you know, a video call at the moment, and for a day at work, it means that there is a lot of video calls. In terms of a typical day, I guess most days we would log on in the morning, start our day with a 9 a.m. call with the team. And it is really important for us to just align ourselves in terms of making sure everyone's on the same page of what the priorities are, what has to be done. Because when you're working from home and you aren't right next to everyone, it can get a bit tricky in terms of knowing exactly where people are up to on their certain tasks or where, you know, certain deadlines are. That transparency does kind of fade a bit. You know, after we've had that meeting, we'll then go on to do like the immediate tasks that we have. Generally throughout the day, you'll have a number of like client calls or calls with other particular members of the team where you need to either, you know, brainstorm things, for example, things where you do have to be there together in some way. And then generally if there's a client meeting or where there's a deliverable, work towards that and have that meeting with the client to walk them through kind of what work has been done. In terms of COVID in New South Wales, restrictions have been easing as I'm located in Sydney. So some days we do tend to go into the office where you know, we do have tasks that are a bit hard to work virtually for, things like, you know, whiteboarding together when we try and like design slides and try and storyboard that out, have everyone like put in the ideas together and draw that out. I think there's a lot of days where we do come in for activities like that, just to help the discussions a bit more. But at the end of the day, I think every day is quite different. But I guess typically that's something that you would expect for what my day would look like.
Great, thanks, Tien. Carolyn?
Yeah, for me, I guess definitely day to day, it is quite different depending on the engagement. But I guess to be helpful, I'll make it specific to the engagement I'm on now. So we do start off with a 9 a.m. stand-up, virtual of course. And like Tien mentioned, it's just aligning on our priorities, what we need to do for the day and where we picked off from yesterday or last week. And then, so at the moment, we're running a couple of workshops with clients, and at the moment it's process mapping. So understanding how their processes run end to end, what teams are involved, and also identifying a couple of risks and controls within that. So it's quite detailed workshops to tease out, I guess, a detail of their own day-to-day. And normally, I guess in a non-COVID environment, that would also include shadowing, and also that would pick out, for example, what risks or what maybe gaps are in their processes. And so that's a more data collection stage. And with that, we run away and analyze a lot of those. So we look at volumes, frequencies, and I guess put together slides and presentations, especially for the higher stakeholders. And to that, we might make a couple of recommendations. We might also identify a couple of gaps as well. And together, that's a lot of working with a team to really deliver all these out on time, especially with quite a couple of deliverables we need to do simultaneously. And yeah, definitely, I guess in the COVID environment, a lot of video calls, video fatigue is very real. But yeah, as restrictions are easing, we are slowly coming back to the office and seeing everyone and back to kind of normal.
Great, thanks, Carolyn. Justin?
Yeah, definitely very project dependent. I guess, I mean, most of the kind of day-to-day things that I do have probably been said. I guess it's a bit more helpful from more of like a skills-based angle. The kind of stuff that you tend to do is there's a lot of like qualitative analysis, a lot of quantitative analysis too. So a large part of your day might be in Excel or in Python if you're super quanti. And if you're not, then it won't be. As well as that, yeah, a lot of pack writing, a lot of internal kind of liaising. So that's, you know, your morning stand-ups, speaking with, you know, different like expert partners and principals in different parts of the world and like soliciting their opinion on things, as well as a lot of engagement with the client. But yeah, definitely very, very project dependent. I've had projects where I've spent the entire or a large portion of that project in data, in the kind of weeds, and others where, you know, it's really client facing and I haven't really touched data at all. So depends on the client and the specific needs of the project.
Great, thanks, Justin.
What can I add to this? Look, I think everyone's mentioned a lot about starting scrums, ending scrums, and I think Justin touched on really good things about like functional stuff. So you might be doing interviews for certain projects, you might be doing modeling, you might be doing PowerPoint. I think one thing that is often underlooked is how much storyboarding you end up doing. So thinking about how do you structure a story, thinking about what's the crisp articulation or what's the elevator pitch of what you're presenting at a steer call on Thursday. And then leading back from that, like what are the supporting points that we need to do? And then having a point of view. So when you say it to a partner, it sounds confident and strong and they go like, you know what, that's fine. You go ahead, do what you need. I think that's one thing that has been mentioned. The other thing that I would say is apart from the coffee runs, I've got 2 kids. So every day at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, like I leave the office, I drive, I go pick up my kids. And then after that, I spend time with them till 7. And then I log on till an hour at night. But as well as that, like the firm or the team that you work with tries to work around those things as well. So that's like a typical day for me looks a little different, but not too dissimilar.
And maybe Josh, did you want to talk about perhaps like a team charter and about how different days for different people can be worked around with a team?
Yeah. Most consulting firms would have some level of what is known as team norms, whether it's called a work smart charter, whether it's called, I think Virtual Pets is Bain's old one. But it's just things where like you might have a goal that you want to achieve for a week, or like you can say, oh, I want to be a great tennis player. Therefore, every Thursday I am 3 hours dedicated to tennis, or I'm going to exercise every morning. And that's going to be my goal that all my other team members hold me to. For me, it's making sure that I'm around for my kids, making sure that I'm able to do drop-offs and pickups. And that my wife also gets to feel like she's working a full-time job just as much as I am. That for me is success. Like if we feel like we're both sharing the load.
Great, thanks for that, Josh. I'll now move on to our next question. So the next question is around the skills that you need to excel in consulting. So this is a real one that a lot of students always ask is, I'm doing X degree, but I don't know if that's enough. What is going to fill that skill gap? What are the, what's the interviewer really looking for that will tick that box? And maybe we'll just leave it to one skill or sort of insight per panelist so that we each panelist can provide an insight there. So Carolyn, we'll start with you, please.
Yeah, for sure. I think a key skill while you're in consulting is certainly, I'll go with a soft skill, and that's certainly stakeholder management. And by stakeholders, they could be your partner, they could be your director or client or your colleagues. And sometimes different people will ask of different things for you. They'll also have different standards. And I think it's being able to go up front and ask what they're looking for and kind of align on what they're looking for from you, because it's not always a one size fit all approach. And I think really tailoring that as well, and also managing expectations on your end and their end, and ensuring that they get the best out of yourselves and it's a good relationship there. I would say that's definitely something good to develop, especially as you go into networking, as you go into learning more about individuals in your firm and other people as well.
And Carolyn, if I'm working at Macca's, how can I get that stakeholder management skill?
I think that's a really good question. In terms of if you're putting that forward in an interview, it's certainly, for example, that could come up in an example of customer service. For example, a customer was upset, what you did to, first of all, listen to what they were upset about, also being able to manage what you can do within McDonald's restrictions and what they were looking for. So that might be a refund, that might be a voucher, for example, or how you manage that between the manager. So I think it's definitely about how you're presenting it, but also really being able to pick out those skills and not undermine certain elements of your day-to-day that you can present.
Perfect, thank you. I'll now pass on to Justin.
Yeah, maybe a slightly different angle. And there's obviously lots of different, soft and hard skills. Maybe the key one is, which is kind of like a higher level, it's being sort of comfortable being uncomfortable. You're constantly going to be thrown in the deep end with things, and that's okay. And I think it's just developing a sense of comfort around that. I mean, not everyone is, a genius and an amazing writer and an amazing communicator. We all have our skills, and that's totally cool. And I think it's about playing to your strengths, knowing what you're good at and really owning it, and knowing what your weaknesses are too, because everyone has them. And within that frame, just recognizing that you won't always get things, and that's fine. And you've got to be able to be comfortable with that, and be comfortable asking the right questions, and trying to navigate that uncertainty so you do understand it at some point. So yeah, that's my insight. Great,
thank you. Tien? Oh, sorry, Josh. I've done it already. Josh.
It's okay. I think one of the most critical skills that you need to excel in consulting, whether this is the interview process or whether this is on the job, is structured thinking. Being able to phrase your thoughts in a succinct way that allows someone else to see your thought process. And the reason why this is important, I think, let's think of 3 things, right? 1, it helps you get your thoughts in order in a very clear way to align your priorities. 2, the other person can understand it really well. And 3, it's really crisp and it gives you confidence when you're able to nail it. And that's the confidence that will take you through to the partners, to your principals, to your managers. If you deliver things with confidence and it sounds like it's structured, they'll believe you and they'll run with it. So yeah, structured thinking.
Great. And I like how you structured your answer as well to that. Thank you. And finally, Tien.
I think mine is something that you don't always learn at uni, and it's being able to identify the so what. And what I mean by that is, you know, when you're doing an assignment, sometimes you get to an answer and that's the end. Like you submit your paper, this was the answer. But in consulting, when you're working with solving problems, sometimes you have to think, if this is the answer that we've gotten to, what is the so what? Like, what does that mean for the client? What does it mean for the business? What does it mean for the industry? I think if that's something that you can kind of start thinking about, not only in work, but even at university, when whatever it is you're doing, that mentality of thinking, what do these implications have on any other, you know, side effects or catalysts. I think that's a conceptual thing that is quite important, that once you start working, you'll find that it's very relevant to the way of thinking on the job as well.
Definitely. Thanks, Tien. And I think, like all the skills that have been listed here, they aren't something that you could probably learn overnight. I think, as Carolyn said, you can probably make sure you can apply your situation and sort of pull out where you have those skills. But definitely, I could think all the panelists would agree that this is something that you'll be learning throughout your whole professional career. So don't stress if you're not there yet. Moving on to our final pre-written question. Which is around one piece of advice. So we'll limit it to a sentence or 2 per panelist around what's one piece of advice you would give a student that's aspiring to enter the consulting industry. If it makes it easier to think of your answer, you could think of your younger self and perhaps say, one piece of advice that you would give students are looking to enter the industry. And so we'll start with Justin.
So my one piece of advice, similar to what I was saying in the previous question, and that's just being true to yourself, being true to your strengths. In consulting, you need a diverse range of skill sets to solve a diverse range of problems. So don't try fit a mold and like kind of pretend to be a type of like graduate or student or professional that you aren't. It'll be exhausting as well. So just play to your strengths, know what you're good at, and really work that.
Perfect. Thank you. Josh?
Oh man, one piece of advice. I think it's that everyone has an opinion. Everyone is entitled to an opinion on things, and you have to be confident in raising your opinion. So don't neglect your own voice. Like be strong in your hypothesis, have conviction, obviously prove it and proof it out and be strong, do the back work, but like be confident when you deliver it. Yeah.
I think that's very hard for students, especially entering into an industry, having that confidence. But definitely, if you do the research, you can answer with confidence. Thank you, Josh. Tien?
I think from all the answers that we've heard throughout the night so far, it's safe to say that consulting is very different, and any firm that you join, it will be very different as well. So in terms of a piece of advice I have is to continue going to events like this, or any chance that you have to be able to talk to different people from different firms, from different roles, just so you can get a better understanding of what it's like, or certain pieces of work that they do, and find out things that you wouldn't be able to see online from searching on Google. So I think being able to have that diversity of knowledge, it will really help you in terms of when you do try and enter the industry and understand it a bit more.
Thank you. And finally, Carolyn?
For me, my one small piece of advice, I think similar to the diverse areas of thought, I think try not to always stick to that one path or the consulting books or the business books. I think what you'll find people in consulting really appreciate if you have, for example, some small knowledges in engineering, for example, or sciences or health and whatever you're passionate about. And it's not a small amount of times I hear people saying, who here has a pharmaceutical background, just to ask for that. And having little niches really do help you step up. So yeah, just to rehash what a lot of people have said, don't try to fit yourself in that mold. What makes you stand out will really elevate your position.
Great, thanks Carolyn. And I think that's some really good advice that's very applicable and very doable. So thank you for that panel. That wraps up the pre-written interview questions. So we'll now transition into the Slido questions. Just a reminder to all those in attendance that this is how you can access it. So simply join at slido.com with the code 45161 or simply use the QR code. But I'll now transition in the next second. I'll just let you, if you need to quickly take a photo of that and jump on. Otherwise, I'll open up the Slido so you can see all the questions that we've got so far. Okie dokie. So got a few questions there. As you can see, we've got some with more votes than others. So if you do scroll down and you see one that you're really keen on hearing, make sure you thumbs that up. But I think to start with, we'll start with the one that's voted 6. Is there a big difference in terms of hours worked with the Big Four consulting and management consultancies like OW, Carney, and Strategy? And so I think Carolyn, as I represent Big Four consulting working at KPMG, a Big Four in quotation marks. So perhaps we'll get Carolyn to start us off with perhaps giving a bit of an insight into what that could look like, and then we'll hear from each of the remaining panelists there. So Carolyn, do you want to kick us off?
Sure thing. This might be an annoying answer, but definitely depends on the project you are on. And in terms of hours worked, I think, again, that is kind of managing expectations and what you can particularly deliver. Also, it can also highly depend on the client and what they're looking for. I think in terms of hours, just speaking on Big Four, it definitely can vary, and sometimes when there is a deliverable, for example, that's pressing tomorrow, there might be a couple of more hours there, and that's always a team effort. So you're not always alone in just trying to work really late nights. Yeah, I think it definitely varies, but also I think it's also fun to develop how you can be more efficient in what you can produce as well.
Definitely. And maybe, Justin, did you want to give a bit of insight there?
Yeah, sure. So obviously can't comment on any firm other than my own. It's very project dependent. Like there's, it kind of, how it tends to work is the shorter the piece, maybe the more intense, because the tighter the deliverables are, generally. So if the work you're doing is primarily strategy as opposed to like implementation pieces, the engagements would tend to be shorter, I think. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the hours might be a bit longer. But yeah, in saying that, I mean, I've had projects where it's been quite intense hour-wise, and others where it's not so bad at all. The kind of core theme throughout is, you know, how do you kind of manage your own time, which is similar to what Carolyn said, and how do you, you know, set those boundaries for yourself? So like, even if it is a real, you know, crunch period on the project, how can I ensure that I'm, you know, getting up in the morning and meditating and going for my runs and doing whatever I need to feel good and manage my time? So yeah, really project dependent, but I think like it is expected that when there is an intense project and there's a crunch period, you along with the rest of your team will get together and kind of put in the hours. But in saying that work-life balance is an important thing as well, and that's definitely recognized.
Definitely. I think just to make the question a bit more a different angle for Tian and Josh, maybe you could talk about how perhaps your firm, what they balance with different, I know Josh spoke about the charter, so if you can go into that more detail, or perhaps provide some insights into what else do you fit into those hours if your firm has other team building exercises. I'd love to hear some other opinions there. Josh?
Yeah, so already mentioned the Work Smart Charter, which is like a weekly meeting where you talk about how bad the week before was, or how good the week before was. What are some of the wins? What are some of the obvious glaring mistakes that you shouldn't have done in the first place as a team? And it's important that no one takes blame in this. Like, I think sometimes when it comes to hours work, like some of it's self-inflicted, some of it's just part of the strategy process, right? Like you find this hypothesis and you're like, well, let's explore a bit more. And it's like really huge. And all of a sudden the whole team is just like really crunching hard at it. So I think that's one of the things that we do to really look at work-life balance. And I don't think it's necessarily like about how many hours you work. It's more about what's the outcome that you're able to drive. And I think if you're consistently driving like big outcomes for the client, you're consistently changing minds, you're pulling out the strategic answer, like the hours that you work going into it aren't going to feel as bad. If you're able to like have a good CEO meeting, have a good like stakeholder meeting. So I think just don't take that as the only metric to measure.
Definitely. Tian, did you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, I think something I will say in terms of work-life balance is that with consulting, like we've all said on the panel, often there are a number of deliverables that you're working to. But in terms of working from home, what that means is, as a team, we often do try and map out, when are these deliverables coming up? When can everyone be aligned in terms of when things are due, and how can we work within ourselves and our own working styles to get there? It means because we're working from home, we don't necessarily all have to be online at the exact same times if we don't need to be. As an individual, you can work at your own pace and, work to your pieces of the analysis. And as long as you get it to the team by when they need it, it means that you're not always pushing yourself to work at hours that you don't need to be as well. So I think that's just one thing to consider.
Great, thanks team. And I think as well, as Justin mentioned and Carolyn, it does vary per project, but also probably varies per stage of project as well. So I think, and there's no cookie cutter answer to that question. It really does depend. So I hope that whoever questioned that it has been answered for you there. Moving into the next highest ranked question around graduate and entry roles. What does that look like? Perhaps I think the classic role is probably a business analyst. Correct me if I'm wrong in your respective firms. Are there any other areas that graduates can enter into a firm? And perhaps to add on to that question, what can that look like as a graduate? What kind of opportunities do they get? So why don't we start with Justin this time?
Just to clarify, is the question what roles can you take before landing a grad job in consulting, or is it like what other roles other than a consultant in a consulting firm can you land?
It's a good question. I think this question might be asking both. So why don't we let's do it a bit more practical, and let's go with what jobs before you get into consulting can perhaps be a bit more leverage, and we'll disregard the second half of the question for now.
Okay. In that case, I think it's quite broad, right? Because I think someone else said on the panel earlier, I mean, you've got all these different I think it was Carolyn, you've got all these different projects where, niches are needed. I think typically if you're not coming in through a graduate role, but you're, coming in at a more senior level, more senior position, maybe the classic pathway is either like you do an MBA and you join at that level, or you go into industry and you do something possibly quite specific. So whether it is like an engineering or software engineering role where, you've got great technical abilities, or whether you come from banking. I think Josh came from banking. So and then you kind of join a firm and you've already got that leg up and you've already sort of aligned to an extent. So again, it depends. There's no concrete answer. I think whatever kind of path you're going down to get there, like as long as there's quite a clear skill or like knowledge base or area that you're mastering and that you can really sell as your entry point.
Great, thanks for that, Justin. Tien, did you have any insight here?
Yeah, I think echoing a lot of what has been said, there's no one particular role that, you know, consultants will look for, because it is about having a very diverse team that have skills from all different areas. But I think if speaking to someone who isn't from a typical business background, something that might help is, no matter what role industry you're in, making sure you do have a level of business acumen and understanding how businesses work, because I think it's more about being able to apply your knowledge and whatever niche you have into consulting, which often means how can the skills you have be applied into a business sense. So maybe having a think about it from that way would be a good thing to think about.
Definitely. Josh, did you have any opinion here?
I think a lot of it has been said. Like, from an entry or graduate role perspective, we're really looking for smart people. And whether or not you're doing a business degree, the way you frame yourself in terms of outcomes can always be achieved. Like, whether you're a marketer, right? I grew conversion by 50%, and which led to X revenue increase. Like, it's all about how you frame yourself and what you've accomplished in your roles, as opposed to doing a business degree or working in a particular industry. The thing that I will say is research your firms, like know what your firm is strong in. So if I'm financial services, I could apply to OW, I could apply to McKinsey, I could apply to Carney. If I did a lot of buy side or sell side due diligence, I could apply to LEK. Like, know the firms and what they do, what they specialize in, and that can help you find a better niche as well if you're going in the lateral path.
Thanks, Josh. And Carolyn, did you have any insights here? Or maybe you sort of mentioned that you tried a little bit of everything. Maybe did that sort of help you, that maybe help your application, or help you once you were landing on projects, drawing upon all these different experiences?
Yeah, for sure. I think, as everyone above has mentioned, I think being able to draw on and also apply a couple of different applications that you have, just to really present a diverse experience. And I guess specifically to this question, maybe I wouldn't say it matters too much on what exactly your role is or what you're currently specializing in, but as long as you show a deep knowledge of the role itself, the process, and how the dots connect to the wider and higher level picture, I think that will position you quite well for consulting.
Great, thanks everybody there. Moving on to our next question, and I think we'll expand this into grads as well. What type of work can interns expect to complete in a consulting firm, interns and grads? Is it just the coffee run? I think Josh mentioned coffee was quite important. Is it just the coffee run, or are you really sinking your teeth into something difficult, and are they dare putting you in front of the client? Really curious to know. So I think we'll start with Tien and then go to Josh.
Yeah. So in terms of, I'll start with as an intern maybe, and then phase that into a grad. I think when you conduct an internship, you're still at university. So one of the biggest things is you're learning sometimes for the first time how to use PowerPoint, how to use Excel. And these are tools that are like used on an everyday basis on the job. So often it's doing things like pieces of analysis to help you wrap your head around how can you become efficient at, you know, using these Excel shortcuts, wrapping your head around how you can actually use PowerPoint to shape a compelling story. So I think these things that seem quite simple do become very important later on for you to perform your work. Kate, touching on your question in terms of starting as a grad, is it the coffee runs? Are you dared put in front of the client? I think, as we have said a lot, it is project dependent, but from my experience as a grad so far, I can definitely say that it's not just about coffee runs. You're definitely a key part of the team, and you are doing work that is, you know, beneficial to the client. And I myself have been put in front of the client many times. I think it's all about, everyone starts out as a grad at different levels, and it's really about, you know, what strengths do you have in your skills, where are you at the moment, and what things can you do to bring value to the team? So if you're someone that has quite good stakeholder management already, it's not uncommon for you to be then put in front of the client to explain the work that you've done. So I think it is very different in some ways, but as we've said, think about what those skills that you have, you would find that the team would be willing to help you enhance those skills as well.
Great, thanks Tien. Josh?
Sorry, I'm smiling so much, and Kate probably knows why. I will explain in a second, but just as a start, like interns, we hire a lot from our interns. And so when we have interns, we give them pieces, like chunks of the pie, just as if they were a fresh BA. Recently with a grad, what I got her to take a customer survey. There was a short piece on, I think like 1,000 entries. And I said, look, we need a storyline. This is the storyline that I have in mind. Can you go make the slides, come up with like the sketch for it, do the analysis, and then after that, bring it. And so she managed to own that piece end to end. And that was like great, right? And the reason why I was laughing with Kate was when Kate came to Internet Carney, super jealous, she got flown to Vietnam and she was there for 6 or 7 weeks with our PCE team, helping an institution that build propositions. And so like, you're absolutely treated as if you are part of the firm and you are a huge, important talent. So much has gone into recruiting, so you can expect a lot of work.
Definitely, and Josh is very accurate with my experience. I think I was even at a CEO meeting, which blew my mind that the firm had that much trust in my ability and myself. So I think I completely echo what Josh was saying, is that you've gone through the recruitment process, you've worked with the team, they know your strengths, they know who you are, and they have that base level of trust, and they really want to see you grow as well. So they think you can step up to the challenge, and they know you're more valuable than just the coffee run. Carolyn, did you have an insight here as well as a recent grad?
Yeah, for sure. I can nudge more to the graduate process. In terms of coffee runs, I think the first couple of weeks, it's managers and senior consultants buying you coffees. And I think it's really getting to know people around the firm. And I think that's really exciting that they take the time out just to have a chat with you and really align on your goals. And that's really exciting. And yeah, like Kate and Josh said, there's definitely a lot of trust put in you, especially in front of a client. I think that was something that surprised me as well. And sometimes you're pulled across very ad hoc to explain something that you're working on or explain a project to a client, and sometimes put in front of them. And it's often quite surprising how much of your work sometimes goes to the final. And at first, I guess it's a bit of a learning curve of, are you sure? Do you want to check this again for the 18th time? But yeah, there's definitely a lot of trust. And I think it's building up the skill of being able to make client-ready deliverables and just putting the trust in yourself as well. So definitely a really exhilarating experience as a grad.
Thank you, Carolyn. And Justin, did you have any insight here as well around when you first started at Oliver Wyman?
Yeah, absolutely. So quick one, I guess. I did join as an intern, and as an intern, I was treated as a consultant. I was told, like, you are a consultant, and I had a deliverable which was sizable and meaningful to like the team, and that was great. I was given the opportunity to learn Python and then apply Python on that project, which was really, really cool. To kind of learn that with support from like a really great manager, and then be able to apply that and contribute was a cool experience. So part of the reason why I joined as a grad was I was kind of given responsibility straight away, and I was able to kind of play off my strengths straight away too. So yeah, if you join as an intern, like, expect to be treated as a consultant, and that also goes to the application process as well. The recruitment, it's pretty much the exact same at the intern level and at the grad level.
Great, and I think we'll stick with you as well, Justin. I've seen there's a question around programming, and in particular, you've mentioned Python. So you mentioned that you learned it on the project, so you didn't, I'm assuming here you didn't come with programming skills. Could you maybe expand? I'm in particular looking at the question that says, are programming skills, particularly in the context of data analytics and processing, valued in management consulting?
Yeah, so I had a little bit of experience before. I mean, it was nothing substantial. But what's quite cool is get opportunities to play your strengths. And because I wanted to learn more, I was given that opportunity. So what that meant in practice was, I mean, we have like a lot of internal courses, you know, so it's getting the opportunity to do those courses, but then it's also kind of getting really small chunks of code to work with, and then to, you know, pass that to your manager, and for your manager to kind of point out where you went wrong, and refine that iteratively until you're, you know, really owning a piece of code and figuring out like how the different data structures work and producing some cool insights, hopefully. So are they valued? Definitely. I think if you are a quantity person, if you like that kind of thing, or even if you're you know, you don't know it quite yet, but you think like that and you kind of like data, it's a great skill to have. And I think increasingly as things become more digital and, you know, data and analytics becomes more valuable, it's a great thing to have. In saying that, it's not essential. There's lots of consultants that aren't super technical, you know, programming wise. You will kind of have to learn a base level of Excel. But a lot of people are, you know, a lot more qualitative. They're better at client management. They're better at research, at writing, and those skills are valued too.
Great, thanks, Justin. And I saw Josh, you were nodding along there. Do I take it that you're a programming whiz?
Absolutely not. But there's a lot of value in it. So we did a project for a mining company where the whole project was sold on the basis of analytics, and you put sensors in diggers, and as you dig, you sense. And by analytics, we designed a solution that helped the client get, I think, about 12 to 20% more yield. Nothing else changing. So I think more and more as people understand analytics, there's increasing amounts of opportunity. So get some under your belt. But absolutely, like, don't be afraid. It's not super difficult. And that's one of the things you can work on before coming into consulting.
Great, thanks, Josh. And Tian, I'm really interested to hear from you as someone coming from a science background. Did that help you understand the data side of things, or did you sort of learn that on the job?
I would say even though I did science, the science that I did, biotechnology, it was not very data heavy at all. So I'm one of those people that is, much more qualitative. I don't really have a lot of those data heavy skills. And I think although even if it's something that you have, it is very valuable. I think any skill that you can bring to consulting, you'll never know when it comes in handy, when there's a client that's in that industry or in that field. But it doesn't mean that it's an absolute benchmark or requirement to apply for the job as well. So I think a lot of what we've said so far on the panel is work to your strengths. So if it's something that you have, definitely flaunt it. Show us that it's a great skill of yours. But at the end of the day, not a requirement. Don't feel pressured to try and scramble to pick something up if it's not your strength.
Great, thanks, Tian. And Carolyn, do you have any insight here? Perhaps, you know, the person to go to help you digest a big sheet of data, or did you have any tips if you're perhaps not the data analytics whiz kid, what steps you could perhaps take to understand it, or what to do if you're given that data set?
Yeah, for sure. I think that in itself presents a really exciting opportunity. So I was in that situation, and it was in an engagement I mentioned earlier where the program they were using to hold data didn't generate very robust reports. So that was all exported to Excel, and through Excel we had to create reports from there. And I think from there, with your firm, you'll definitely have a lot of online learning that can direct you to that. So for example, we have access to LinkedIn Learning, which is previously Lynda. And I learned a lot of Excel basically by demand, having to produce those reports. And I think on top of that as well, not just developing really good quantitative insights, but if it will make your job easier, learning, I don't know if I would call it programming or other people would call it programming, but if learning a little bit of VBA just to automate a couple of your Excel spreadsheets as well, and making a 5-hour task into a 2-hour task, that will definitely present something quite great for your engagement manager, and definitely they will appreciate that as well.
Great. Thank you for the tips, Carolyn. I'm sure anyone would happily turn a 5-hour task into a 4-hour task, and with Excel, amazing. So we'll move on to the next question here. Oops, there we go. So this question obviously takes a bit more of a long-term approach, and perhaps this is coming from a student who is looking to see consulting as perhaps a lily pad. So it'd be great to understand from each of the panelists if as a consultant there's room for progression, or does your career max out at a certain stage? And perhaps I'll tack on to that question, you know, is it simply a path to partnership? So let's start with Josh first, if that's okay.
Good point. Look, as far as pyramids go, so consulting is a pyramid, right? You've got partners at the top, you have analysts at the bottom, you've got managers in the middle. Your progression through the pyramid isn't very much limited as by room in your firm as it is by your own ability. Because if you're showing that you can perform at a higher level, then we just charge you out for more, right? So from that perspective, like, it's not very hard to progress through the ranks. Now, in terms of progression for your career, consulting is a great place, one, to discover the industry that you want to be in the future, because you'll work across a few. And two, I think it gives you such good exposure to senior stakeholders, to the way you present to them, to the way you frame your thinking, that it is one of the best, if not the best, career accelerators that you can do coming out of a graduate. So there's tons of room for career progression, and it's not just within consulting. Like, you see partners go out into industry being heads of strategy. You see people going to take thought leadership roles in government. The world is your oyster, and I think it's more for people who can't decide what they want to do. Yeah, or who love solving problems and working till 12 o'clock at night all the time. But yeah.
Thanks, Josh. I see Tian nodding along. Do you, as someone who's just entered the career, what's your insight around the concept of progression if you've thought that far ahead?
I think anyone in the firm at whatever level you talk to, in consulting, it's always about trying to push people to constantly learn every day. And I think at whatever role you are, you know, you set your own internal goals and what you want to achieve. And it means that at whatever level you reach, there's constantly goals that you're trying to achieve, and you're trying to continue to upskill yourself. So even if we take aside from progression from a pyramid sense, as Josh mentioned, there's always the progression internally as well, in terms of what you can learn and all the skills that that consulting can bring you. Because at the end of the day, you're working with so many different clients, so many different problems. I think each day you're progressing, you know, at an accelerated rate that you don't even realize, because of, you know, all the exposure that you're getting. So I think, you know, in terms of outside of the pyramid, it is always progressing.
Thanks, Tian. And I think Justin really agreed with that point about constantly learning. Did you want to expand on that perhaps, Justin?
Yeah, sure. It's an interesting space to be, because you're almost forced to continue progressing just by the nature of like these companies. So, you know, you're constantly getting reviewed and assessed, and the expectation is that you are progressing. But in saying that, there's no like up or out policy. So people do progress at different rates, and that's fine. And ultimately, it's up to you. So if you are someone who wants to progress really quickly in terms of what you are doing, so you like moving up the ranks to, you know, own things and manage things more, and managing teams, or learning more about specific content areas, like it's on you to do that. So it's totally skills based. It's not like, oh, you've been here for 2 years, therefore you go. So it's very much linked to like individual ambition and interest, I guess. But definitely a lot of room for progression. I think if you're looking for a career that is constantly moving, and there's constantly avenues to progress on all of those fronts that all the panelists have mentioned, it's a great place to start.
Great, thank you, Justin. And moving on to Carolyn, I think something that we see often is people not only leaving the profession, but coming back in, or people entering consulting at a later stage. Did you want to perhaps talk about sort of the dynamics of your team, and if they've come with different experience, or how you see the sort of general mix of KPMG?
Yeah, for sure. I think especially in Big Four, you might hear about the boomerang, where people start off as a grad or a vacationer, and then they go out to industry, and then they come back to Big Four for the work-life balance. And I think as you progress up the ranks, you're moving, especially in consulting, you're moving towards managing people and managing a lot of surrounding effects around that. And as you go to partner stage, you're essentially doing a lot of selling as well and client engagement and less on the consulting side. So if you want to branch out into the industry and go more specific, there's definitely quite a lot of opportunities for there as well. And sorry, Kate, to answer your question, in terms of the mix of the team, there's certainly quite diverse people who have been here as vacationers and people who have started out, come back, and also people who come from industry and want to bring all that experience that they've developed over the years into consulting to give a really fresh and also robust industry outlook.
Great, thank you, Carolyn, and I really appreciate the diversity of answers there. And I will stick with you, Carolyn, for our next question. I'd like to choose the one around is how does the consulting process in the real world compare with the process in something like the Consulting Club? As someone who was in the Consulting Club just last year, it'd be really great to see from your perspective if they are similar or if they're completely different.
Yeah, for sure. I think the consulting process in Consulting Club, and my fellow consultants can correct me if I'm wrong, they're more around the strategy side. For me, I'm looking at more of the operations advisory, so more around the implementation as well as assessing a couple of things more on the ground. I would say to that, in terms of the high level process, it will be fairly similar. So breaking down the problem, finding a couple of the root causes and hypothesis testing as well, that's fairly similar. It's definitely quite expedited in Consulting Club. One thing I would say is perhaps the slides are more pitch oriented, where the slides you create for your clients are very text heavy, boring graphics, basically everything you're told not to do, and they're quite convoluted and very data driven there.
So you try to jam more information on a slide.
Yeah, for sure. You definitely need a microscope to read it.
Thank you for your honesty, Carolyn. And Tien, as someone who is really integral to the growth and development of the UTS Consulting Club and our consulting program, very curious to hear how you think what we really do at Consulting Club translates into the real world.
Yeah, I think to mirror a lot of what Carolyn has said, there are definitely a lot of similarities. I think if you're part of the Consulting Club, it's getting used to that process of working in a team with diverse people. It's like that experience of working with a client, being given their problem and then working with them throughout the semester to help solve this problem and then presenting it to them at the end. I think that mirrors a lot of what a project timeline would look like in terms of working with the client on the job. But one difference I would point out is, as Carolyn mentioned, at the Consulting Club, it's very pitch heavy where, at the end, you're trying to pitch to them a solution and you're trying to sell them that the solution that you've come up with is the best one. I would say in a real client engagement, it's often a collaborative process each day that you're working with the client. So there's not one day where you won't contact someone from the client to talk through what you've done. And most of the time, by the end of it, they've pretty much agreed to everything that you've said already, because the final pitch isn't a pitch to show, our strategy is the best. It's kind of a collation of all the work that's been done to really document the steps that you've taken and for them to take that away and be able to work on it themselves. So I think that would be the key difference.
Great, thanks, Jen. And certainly I think previously when you're on client site for 4 out of the 5 days, it would be a bit strange if it was a surprise solution at the end of the process. So definitely collaboration is to be expected. Justin, I'd be curious to hear from your perspective if, when your mate was telling you about the consulting world and you were still in the startup space, did his words translate to what you actually experienced or what you perhaps read around the area?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't, get to experience any consulting clubs at uni or any experience like that before. But in terms of the dynamic nature of the work and the role and the people and the problems, absolutely. I have done like a bit of work with like university consulting clubs since working like at Oliver Wyman, and to see the kind of work that they've done, including the kind of stuff that UTS Consulting Club does, like it really does to an extent mirror that problem solving and insights process. I think it's fantastic. Maybe the kind of key differentiator is similar to what Tian said. At the end, it's not like you're kind of taking this solution and passing it to the client or like putting it on them. I mean, the client are part of it. It has to be something that it's not only that they like understand it, but they own it. Because the classic flaw in consulting is, or the misconception is it's these people that come along and they give a really nice pretty deck to the business for them to do nothing with, and it shouldn't be that. It should be collaboratively solving a real problem to delivering impact. So yeah, that's probably the key thing in my opinion.
Great, thank you, Justin. I think Josh, to slightly alter the question for you, I think you've probably worked with a number of grads or fresh interns coming out of university, and I'd be curious to know, in your opinion, if the theory that we learn or the things that they learn from societies does prepare them for the world of consulting in practice, or if there's a bit of a gap, and how perhaps the firms themselves fill that gap of knowledge.
It's a good question. I think there's definitely a difference in terms of people with quant background. So like people that are familiar with Excel versus someone that comes from a psychology degree or like a English degree that has never touched Excel in their life, right? These people exist and they are smart people. That is why, they've made it through the interview process, but they just need a bit more help, right? So you can definitely tell those that have had those experience, and you get that in something like a consulting club. I would say though, like some of the points echoed about the consulting club process is that it's very much pitch heavy. And in some of the comps that I judge, I've noticed that there's not a good appreciation of the firm's or the target's current situation. And that often when we go to the client, like it's like, oh, we might do a growth strategy, but then you've got a CEO that's thinking about fires burning as well. So you have to kind of like balance the two of them really gently. So I think in that sense, like with the consulting club process, you're quite focused on the pitch, and that's all well and good. But in the real world, like there's going to be a lot more things that get thrown at you just ad hoc by the CEO or ad hoc by the CXO. So be prepared for that.
Great, thank you. And I think definitely the changing nature of the world in the last couple of months is evidence enough that you might start out with one idea and one solution, but it'll definitely change, and you have to be agile enough and not too married to your solution that you can pivot and adjust there. So thank you for that, Josh. I think we have time for probably one more question. So I'm going to have a quick scroll and think of a good one to end on. I might do the challenge one, because I think, unless the panelists would prefer a different one, I think it's great to hear a sort of coming of age story from the panelists, and I think that'll be a nice end to the panel questions. So the question that will, oops, I think I just ticked it. How do I undo that? Control Z. Oh dear. Well, the question is gone now. Hold on. Let me see if I can find it. I don't know, Vanessa, if you're able to bring it back and put it at the top, that would be great. Vanessa's our Slido whiz kid. But the question was essentially, what is one of the biggest challenges that you faced in your role in consulting? And talk us through how you overcame that. So I think to start, we'll go with Justin first, please.
Very good question. Biggest challenge, probably getting it on top of really unfamiliar content super quickly. And it keeps happening. So it's something that you sort of need to build some resilience to. How I've overcome it is just by like not being afraid to ask silly questions, having confidence to like ask questions right away, because when you front load those, those ambiguities or those things that aren't entirely clear to you, it really does help the team in the long run. So I think, yeah, knowing what you don't know, and maybe kind of linking into that, it's when you are faced with a topic that is like completely unfamiliar, trying to genuinely find like passion or interest in some aspect of it, like helps you to understand it more, because the more that you genuinely are like, oh, this is actually quite cool, what we're solving is really, the more that you start asking questions and the more involved you get in that problem solving. So yeah, it's me.
And maybe just on that, you did mention that you straight off and into grad entered into the aviation industry and had to consult on that. Perhaps you could tell us 1 or 2 steps that you took to familiarize yourself with the base things that you needed to in order to roll onto that project.
Yeah, so we didn't really get an opportunity before the project started to prepare myself. You kind of figure it out as you go. For me, what was quite helpful was like speaking to my manager and having a really frank conversation and being like, look, I really don't know this. But also my manager asked me because I was really fresh. So there was that common understanding, obviously. So it was having kind of at one point like daily sessions, like asking all the kind of residual questions I had from the day and all of the things that were blocking me from really progressing. That was probably the one thing. And maybe a second thing was reading a lot. So it was not only kind of reading like the statement of work to sell the project, but reading like just skimming over similar packs, similar projects that we have done for different clients. And yeah, suddenly you find yourself like a client answering a question and you're like, oh, I know the answer to that. And suddenly it becomes assumed knowledge. And what was quite cool for me was I did a project, like maybe my 3rd project or so, in like quite a niche area of risk. And recently I was contacted by someone at my firm. They're like, oh, you did a project in this space and we're looking at this similar problem. And I was like, oh, I actually know the answer to this. And it like these kind of unfamiliar challenges, problems start to become familiar quite quickly, which is a cool thing.
Yes, all of a sudden you're a subject matter expert and you didn't even know it.
You're a SME and you don't even know what SME stands for.
Exactly. Josh, I'll ask you if you would mind sharing your greatest challenge and how you've overcome it.
Man, I think I hope either Carolyn or Tien decides to cover client, like building client credibility and them trusting like a young BA. I hope so, because I'm not, but that's also like a huge challenge. I think the greatest challenge that you will face in consulting is not burning out. And you can be smart, you can be driven, you can work hard. And if you don't take care of yourself, or if you don't put boundaries in place, you don't have honest conversations with your team, you will burn out. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges that you will face, that you can start working in, like from when you're at uni, right? Like manage your time, be clear about your expectations, be clear about your boundaries. Definitely doesn't help you get into consulting, but it's a problem that you will 100% face if you join a consulting firm. So yeah, that would be the greatest challenge for me.
And have you overcome it? I mean, this is the question, Josh.
Yeah. From time to time, like I think it's something that there are periods where you get really good work-life balance, or really good in the sense that you've got goals, you're ticking them, everyone feels like it's humming. And then there are times where it just like absolutely goes to crap, and like, you're rushing for like late night deliverables. All of a sudden there's a big change on Friday, then that means your weekend like is at peril. Like I think it's just about really like being conscious of it and acknowledging it and having systems and support networks to really work through it. Super important. And like other problems about the consulting process, really important. This equally important, just to make sure you have a sustainable career.
Definitely. And I think transparent communication with your manager is so important, and they're always very understanding. Thanks, Josh. Tien, did you want to share your greatest challenge you faced since becoming a grad?
I think definitely starting as a grad during COVID times and purely working from home has definitely been a great challenge, because being isolated, working remotely, you're already like, I feel like when you're trying to ask questions, it's much more formal reaching out through Hangouts or by sending a message than if you were just next to each other and just asking a simple question. So I think that's something that I definitely had to get myself used to, and learning how to effectively communicate while working from home, and learning how I can best, communicate the work that I've done to help the team and the manager as well. And I think something that really helps with that is as a grad or as an associate, don't just do your job as an associate and stop there. I think something that really helps is when you can effectively step up and, you know, help your manager manage yourself, manage the work, and just show that you can do more than just what you're expected with. I think that really helps with the whole situation in terms of transparency and communicating with your team. And that's kind of one of the ways that I was able to overcome that challenge.
Great, thank you, Tien. And I'm sure everyone can understand or at least empathize with the struggle of being a grad in the COVID era. I can imagine that had more than just one challenge. So well done, and thank you for sharing that. Carolyn, did you have one last challenge to wrap us up?
Yeah, for sure. I can take on the one on client credibility that Josh threw out. Definitely starting out as a junior, there is that mix of imposter syndrome, that also with some clients being skeptical of this consultant coming in just to, you know, storm things up, and then also a steep learning curve that you're not necessarily as well versed in the area that you're currently working on. So I think a lot of factors mixed together can definitely be a challenge, especially as you're presenting. It can also, your self-consciousness might creep in as well. And I think overcoming that is, first of all, empathy and the human element, understanding that who you're talking to is a person and they're happy to draw things out and help you understand, and you're also there to help them. Another thing is trying to pull down the facade of pretending that you know everything or having that need to know everything. And I think I can leave that on a quote that I often go by, which is, there are such things as a stupid question, but it's better than facing up to stupid mistakes. And that's what I tell myself every time I'm about to ask my manager something really dumb.
Great, Carolyn, and that's a perfect quote to end on. I'll now just transition out of the Slido. So there we go. So that wraps up the formal aspect of our panel. I will pass on to Tristram to say some final words in just a moment, but I'd first like to really thank every single panelist here. So I'm sure we're all virtually rounds of applauding. Thank you, Justin, Josh, Tien, and Carolyn. And I'd also really like to thank Oliver Wyman, Carney, and Strategy and as our sponsors for UTS Consulting Club for this year. And I think as well, each of these panelists, this isn't their first time they've helped out UTS Consulting Club, and they're really invested in our success and helping each and every student that attends our event. So thank you for taking some time out of your Monday to share some wisdom and some honesty. And we do have a small token of our appreciation in an e-gift card. Now that we can't do the token Lindt chocolates anymore, you can buy, even if you don't like the Lindt chocolates, we never ask, we always give them. So, but now you can have an e-gift card that we'll send via email tomorrow. I'll also quickly take a screenshot of us all, if that's okay, just for the sake of the pictures. There we go. So smile, I'll take that now. Amazing. And just one last note for me before I pass on to Tristram around keeping up to date with what we've got. So for a number of the people in attendance today, this might be your first time engaging with UTS Consulting Club. So if you want to keep abreast of what we're doing, what our sponsors are doing, I really recommend following us on any, if not all, of our social media. We recently got Instagram, which is very exciting. And we also have a publication coming out with a lot of articles that our sponsors have also produced as well. So that's all from me. Thank you again to our amazing panelists.